you meet all of us. About
Well, my idea was to transcribe them, but if you recall it, your personality and charm and wit just wasn't coming through on paper, and I thought it would be unfair. So that part of the project was put back in the box.
Yeah, I was wincing at as I looked at the transcript as I don't sound good. Okay, so this week, the Torah portion we read yesterday is the unfolding of our ancestors, the early generations. At this point, they're called Hebrews. This is before they're technically Jews. And we've been introduced to Abraham and Sarah. And Abraham, in last week's Torah portion, and what we read yesterday, the week before, and then next week is really the fleshing out of the biographies, the biographical sketches we have of Abraham and Sarah. And Sarah actually it ended yesterday because she passes away. Next week begins with after her death. It deals with her burial. But these two early monotheists, our ancestors, they are people who are what they've done. The resonance we have for history is their commitment to a loving creator who is not one of the elements of nature, but is the creator of all nature, and loves us and wants us to reciprocate that love of our creator and to find strong bonds between each of us, to be able to show that love and caring within humanity. And Abraham and Sarah are in the pantheon of our history. They are pioneers and they bring monotheism, but within monotheism, where the strongest element of their dimension of what they bring to the table can be said to be one of love, kindness, of generosity. So while we have in the Torah portion we read yesterday some really famous episodes in their lives, in a way, the most in a way it's most resonant. The beginning of the Torah portion is very resonant, and that it begins with the idea of welcoming guests. Now, at the end of the prior Torah portion, God tells Abraham at age 99 to circumcise himself, which is not an easy thing, and then to circumcise his family. And afterwards, he'll have from then on, males will be circumcised at it was only males then also, but at age 8 years old. So the scene opens in this week's Torah portion where he's sitting by his tent. He and Sarah had a tent in the desert, which they really had designed as kind of an oasis for travelers. People in the desert need things. People in the desert are not near civilization, and they're likely hungry, tired, thirsty for sure. So they had a tent, and we're told by our tradition that the tent had openings on all four sides, so that he was able, and they were both able to see travelers coming from any direction, so that they could be not only a way station, but proactive in engaging people who needed help and offering their help. So now it's 3 days after his circumcision. He's not in very spry shape, and what the scripture doesn't say, but what the Torah tells us is that God designed it, made it a very hot day, so there wouldn't be too many travelers, because he wanted to have a little rachmanus on Abraham, that Abraham shouldn't have to run around, Abraham and Sarah shouldn't have to run around, especially Abraham just had his surgery. He was, as we're told again by our tradition, he was very bothered that he didn't have anyone to help. There were no customers for his generosity. And the scene opens that he's sitting by the mouth of his tent. And the first words of the Torah portion are, and God revealed himself to Abraham. So there is a communion going on. Then it says, he saw three people walking. Now, these three people, as the Torah portion will unpack, these are three angels appearing human, but they're three angels. Each one has a message for Abraham. One of them is that Sarah will give birth. Another one is about Sodom and Gomorrah. But they're three angels. He looks at them and he sees them as humans. So the way that the Torah puts it, and it's in the note 1 that I sent out, is he like puts God on hold. So hold that thought, God. Look, there are people here. So if you look at number 1, which is Genesis, the very beginning of the Torah portion that we read yesterday, it says God revealed himself to Abraham again. So the scene opens. He's recovering from his surgery, and God does a revelation. Doesn't say what the revelation is, but as Abraham was sitting at the mouth of his tent in the heat of the day, he saw three people. He says to God, my Lord, please do not pass from your servant while I take care of these people. I left out the care. Okay, remember, I want to apologize in advance because these are translations I do, and sometimes there are typos here. I said, well, it should say, well, I take care of these people. Abraham.
Rabbi, you're mumbling a little, and I want to hear what you have to say. If you could just be more clear, because when you go down away from the mic, I have trouble hearing it.
Okay, thank you. I will try to be clear. It says Abraham went to greet the travelers. So that's number 1. Is what the Torah lays out, that Abraham, the Torah is describing that Abraham is having some revelation which has not been fleshed out. It just says that God reveals himself to Abraham. And then it says he sees from the corner of his eye, I guess, he sees, because he's in the middle talking to God, right? He sees three people and he says, hold that, I got to take care of these people. So from this, if you look at note number 2, the Talmud derives, Rabbi Yehuda said, Rabbi Yehuda was a great master of the Talmud. He says, hosting guests is greater than greeting the divine presence. It is of greater caliber as far as spiritual voltage and holiness to be able to take care of human guests than to speak to God, than to actually interface with the divine in a real and open way. As scripture says, my Lord, please do not pass from your servant. So the derivation of the Talmud is pretty clear, because he's putting God on hold. That means they are a priority over speaking to God. And in fact, we find the primary commentary on the Torah, Rashi quotes this piece of Talmud, and that's what every child who studies this piece of Torah studies right away. To say, look, it's how important it is to take care of people. Now, Maimonides also obviously takes his cues from the Torah and the Talmud. You'll never find Maimonides arguing with the Talmud. He puts in his laws, note number 3, he quotes this idea that it's more important to host human guests than to have a divine revelation. And it says hosting guests is greater than receiving the divine presence. We got that. But then he uses a supporting text from the scripture, which is not what the Talmud says. And it's not what we just discussed. He says, as scripture says, he saw 3 people. Maimonides seems to find something odd in the idea that he saw 3 people. The idea that he was in the middle of talking to God, that God revealed himself to him, and Abraham says, please don't go away. I got to take care of these people. That is a very clear lesson that there is a priority, and in taking care of people. What do we learn from the fact that it says he saw 3 people? So what if he saw 3 people? And one possible insight into this, which has relevance beyond what we're going to say right now, but one possible way of looking at this is the fact that when a person is in prayer, any of us, in Jewish law, we're guided to an attitude to prayer. We're guided to an attitude of interfacing with God. Now, none of us is sitting at the tent and having this open revelation of God. We can be sitting in synagogue or in your office or in your living room and talking to God. So, but what's the mindset? What's the frame of mind? So if you look at text 4, this is from the Code of Jewish Law about laws guiding how we say the Shema. It says when reciting the Shema, which we say every day in prayer, twice a day, one should try to exert total concentration with awe and respect, as the citizens of a community would feel if they received a telegram from the king and would read it with deep respect and focus. We don't have kings, and we don't get telegrams. You could only imagine, though, in the times of the writings you're talking about in the 1500s, how that idea resonated. Is the king is everything, and you've got to drop everything for the king. And here, the idea of you want to look at reciting Shema as though this is a message from the king. All business stops, and there's pure focus. So therefore, when we recite Shema, there is the mindset is that we're totally committed to it. And in Jewish law until today, we do not interrupt in the middle of the Shema. If someone comes over, you don't want to be impolite, but you're in the middle of doing something important. So we put our concentration totally into what we're doing. Similarly, with even more so actually, with the Amidah, which is really the heart of Jewish law, of Jewish prayer. Number 5, Code of Jewish Law, it says, while reciting the Amidah, one should focus one's heart and envision oneself as standing before the divine. You're standing, you're talking to God. God's listening to you. It is a conversation, and rid oneself of any distracting thoughts, which is not so simple. We don't want to think about our business. We don't want to think about the meeting that's coming up. We don't want to think about the person standing next to us. We want to think about us and God, so that one's mind and attention is wholly focused on one's communion with the divine. So if that's the case, what was Abraham doing? Abraham's in the middle talking to God. What do you mean he saw 3 people? He's talking to God. So one of the things that the Rebbe offered is that if Abraham, what Maimonides is saying is that those 3 words tell us a very important thing about Abraham's scale of priorities. Abraham was a spiritual master. Abraham has, the Torah says, just had is middle of a divine revelation. Yet somehow, for some reason, he left part of his mind open and part of his field of vision open, looking out for travelers who needed him. Now, why would he do that? That flies in the face of the 2 things of Jewish law we just put there. Except that the Torah is teaching us, and Abraham was teaching us, that even when he was in the middle of a very powerful and holy communion beyond what we can imagine, because none of us ever had that one-on-one with God in that full sense. They're leaving part of his space open. He left it open for that, just in case travelers come. So that kind of explains why Maimonides would swerve. But the fact is that the point is a good one, but the Talmud uses a different support. So he may be trying to teach us something more relevant to the halacha, to the laws, and to the heart and the soul of that guides this practice of welcoming guests. Now, welcoming guests is only one form of doing kindness. There are a lot of different ones. And if Abraham and Sarah were kind people and generous people, we can assume they did it in many different ways. But the idea of welcoming guests seems to be an emblem of how Abraham and Sarah, of their kindness. Charity is one type of kindness. There are many different types of kindness, but welcoming guests has a very special element, and this is what we want to try to explore today. So in note 6, I translated 2 sections of Maimonides' laws about the idea of kindness in general and of welcoming guests in particular. So he writes this in note 6. So it's 2 paragraphs, but I think it's important. It fleshes it out a little bit. He writes, it's a rabbinic commandment to visit the sick. Now, we have 613 commandments. One of those 600 biblical commandments, one of those 613 commandments is to love our fellow as we love ourselves. In other words, that we shouldn't do anything to anyone we don't like done to us. We have to have empathy. We have to open ourselves up. How do you express that? So the rabbis gave us different expressions of that biblical commandment. So there are the specifics. Maimonides is saying the specifics of how we express this idea of caring about each other, those are rabbinic. And he says, you visit the sick, we comfort mourners, we help someone prepare for a funeral, we help prepare a bride, we accompany guests, attend to all the needs of a burial, carry a corpse on one's shoulders, walk before the bier, mourn, dig a grave, and bury the dead, and also to bring joy to a bride and groom and help them in all their needs. These are deeds of kindness that one carries out with this person that have no limit. They are included in the scriptural commandment, love your neighbor as yourself. Now, just to explain a little bit what he's saying, is that we're all commanded to give charity. Tzedakah is a mitzvah. It's the idea of it is 10%. Someone makes less, they give 10%. But there's also a cap. Person the Talmud tells us is not supposed to give more than 20%. Even if they say, well, I want to give, the thing is we're supposed to be responsible with our money. So when it comes to the idea of giving of our resources, there are caps. But with giving of our energy, it depends on what we can handle. So there's no official cap on it. You can't say 20, you can only help people 2 hours a day, or 1 hour a day, or 4 hours a day. It depends what you can do. You can't give more. If you're talking to your accountant, it's not supposed to go more than 20% of income. But as far as input of self, that there's no limit. So Maimonides is saying all of these, and in this paragraph, this first paragraph, visiting the sick, comforting the mourners, all of that, these are all things that's not costing us anything. It's costing us energy. It's our heart is there. It's an investment of ours, but as far as a more difficult to renew resource, it's not there, and therefore there's no limit on that. Do what you can. Now it's interesting. He says, I want to point this. It says accompany guests. What does accompany guests mean? So this is a Torah idea, which as I kind of wrestled with at some level. Growing up, trying to figure out exactly where it fit in. There's a mitzvah to care for guests, and therefore, someone invite someone. When I was in yeshiva and in New York, and I was in Crown Heights, and I was a yeshiva student, and we had a dorm with a kitchen. Every Friday night in the big shul in 770 in Crown Heights. 3, 4, 5, 6 different people would say, "You have somewhere to eat? Come on over." Just nice. I don't know if I ever ate in the dorm. That's very nice. It's beautiful. I cost them a piece of gefilte fish, some chicken, baba ganoush, whatever they gave me, and some challah. I am still grateful to those people. But that's what we call in Hebrew. It's welcoming guests, having guests over. It costs money. But there's another element to welcoming guests, which the Torah makes a big deal about, and it's accompanying them on the way out. Now, where this traces back to is a society that I don't think any of us ever really lived in. In the old days, you'd have a guest over, and now they're going home. Well, outside the house or the tent, it's all Wild West. So not only do you want to feed someone, you want to make sure that somehow they're safe as they're going on their way. You accompany them until they're in a spot where you can feel comfortable. And that was a practice, a Judaic practice, a Judaic mitzvah practice of welcoming guests, was not just to feed, but to help them on the way out, accompanying them on the way out. And that is, it comes up a few different times in Jewish law about the responsibility we have. And what happens if something happened to someone, a block away, when we didn't help, that we didn't walk with them, or didn't pay attention to make sure that they have a safe way forward. So Maimonides, conceivably, he does not put in this paragraph the mitzvah of actually feeding people, because that would cost money. He has a paragraph of things that don't cost money, but they're really important, of using our hearts, our energy, our bodies, to be able to help other people. But then he goes one more paragraph. He says, the reward one receives for accompanying guests is greater than all of the others, which is an interesting thing. We have a lot of different mitzvahs, and tzedakah is one. Giving someone, helping someone who was a poor person, that's a big mitzvah. There are a lot of different ways to do mitzvahs. He says, Maimonides is saying that the idea of accompanying guests, not feeding guests, accompanying guests, has a very special place. This is a statute which Abraham, our patriarch, instituted, and the path of kindness which he would follow. He's choosing this as something that is an emblem of Abraham's kindness and Sarah's kindness. He would feed wayfarers, provide them with drink. Now, he goes back to, things that cost. Giving food, giving drink, and accompanying them. So it seems that the accompanying them, it's the greatest, but the accompanying them, once we've got that settled, that is the flavor. It lends a certain flavor to the idea of giving food and drink. Giving food and drink is a mitzvah, especially if someone really needs it. And giving of ourselves to just a friend, it's a beautiful thing. But the accompanying seems to be a rubric that frames it, gives it context, that makes it very special. Showing hospitality for guests surpasses receiving the divine presence, as scripture states, and he saw through people, as we mentioned before. Accompanying them is greater than showing them hospitality. Our sages said, whoever does not accompany them is considered as if he shed blood. So this Maimonides is putting it from the old days. I don't know if it was in Maimonides' days, but there is idea, certainly in scriptural times, that we literally wanted to make sure that they were physically safe. The court would prepare agents to accompany people who travel from place to place. In a society where there was a functional Jewish court running the society, they would make sure that there were people who were paid, that just to make sure that people weren't traveling alone in dangerous places. If they relax in this matter, it's considered as if they shed blood. Even a person who accompanies a colleague for 4 cubits will receive a great reward. So there is actually a tradition in Torah thinking that when you have guests, we walk them to the door. Maybe it's not only in Torah tradition, but it's certainly in Torah tradition. If people come to our house Friday night and the meal is over, and I say, great to have you, and they said, thanks for having us, one of us or more of us will walk them to the door. That is in the sense of fulfilling the mitzvah of accompanying guests. Now, what's the big deal? What's the big deal of accompanying guests? Especially today. I'm not afraid. If someone walks out, there are times actually that I am worried about someone finding their way in the dark. If they're parked at Chabad, I'll walk with them because I'm worried about them. But most of the time, they can take care of themselves and they'll be okay. Or they may be parked right outside my door. So I'm not walking them to the door to protect them from anything. But so what is the significance of it? And what does it mean for us in life? Maybe some of us are not in a position to have guests. What does this represent, the accompanying? So you want to take a look at well, actually, I wanted to go to number 7 before that. Everyone's pointed out that we can all understand. Anytime there's a kind action done, there is the recipient, and then there's the giver. Usually takes two. And the recipient, usually, what that means is there's someone who is in need, or someone who is the beneficiary or the recipient of kindness or generosity, and there's someone giving it. Now, so if someone tells me now we have Hebrew school going on here, and one of the Hebrew school parents says, oh my gosh, I just realized I have a flat tire, which happens sometimes from time to time. I can do what's in my skill set, which is call AAA and let them use my AAA card. Or I might even help them change the tire, which is not my skill set, but if I can try to help them, I can try to help them. There's me and giving and then receiving. What's the most important part? Generally speaking, the most important part is the recipient, that they got it. If I was outside helping someone change a tire because I'm trying to show off to my my kids that I still have physical abilities or whatever, I have an ulterior motive. That's between me and God. Meanwhile, the guy or the woman outside, their tire was changed. That's a mitzvah. I had an ulterior motive trying to look cool to my kids. That's it's a lame mitzvah. That's between me and God. But the mitzvah is done. Someone got their need taken care of. To the extent even, so I put in number 7, the Medrash tells us to take this to, it's an extreme, that if someone lost money, okay, so I was in ShopRite this morning. Let's say I lost $5 out in the parking lot. And a poor person, a genuinely poor person, walks by, picks up $5. There's no one around. There's no markings on it. They have by Jewish law, they have a right to take it. They take the $5. Now they can buy themselves breakfast. Torah tells us if it was found by a poor person who used it to help themselves, the first person has fulfilled the mitzvah tzedakah. Can you imagine? I have the mitzvah tzedakah. I don't even know what happened to my $5. I still don't know what happened to it. Not only did I not have a pure sentiment of trying to help someone and compassion and empathy, I don't even know I gave it. What the Medrash is saying is, if people are in need, fill the need. That's the most important thing. You, your sentiment, you and God, that's secondary. So the primary thing is take care of the people. Let people's needs be taken care of. Again, I'm not happy with my sentiment, or I'm seeing in someone close to me, I feel that their sentiment is more self-serving. Don't stop them from doing it. Do it. But then we have to work on the, pray better and meditate and work on your sentiments. Never refrain from doing a good thing because you're not happy with your own sentiments. Why does the other person have to suffer? Because you got moral and theological issues and ego issues. Meanwhile, someone has been helped. And the Rebbe put this here in number 8. And I quoted, in acts of kindness, there are 2 components. Fulfilling the practical need of one's fellow, B, the sentiment of the giver. Generally in Torah law, the first is the most relevant. Welcoming guests introduces a novel dimension where the giver's sentiment is critical to this. So what Maimonides is telling us, that is saying, is offering this perspective of Maimonides. So what happens, go back to me being a student. People, why did they invite me over? Invite me over because they know me. It's because it's a practice in many observant communities. You have people over at the table. Maybe we can have the conversation. Who knows? When we finished, field meals done, recited grace after meals. I help clean up because I want to be a good guest. It's time to go home. For most that I can remember, I would imagine most of them say, "Nice seeing you. Come back next week." I'll say maybe. Thank you, and I'll leave. What if someone walked me to the door? What if someone walked me out to the stoop? I would think, there it was there was some personal time. And there was not just about because I saw some yeshiva student who could get better food than what they're giving in the yeshiva. This was about me. That there's some relationship we have. Walking the person to the door or accompanying the person, the Rebbe points out, it frames the meal in a very different way. If the meal is not because you saw someone say in need of food and you gave them food, that's a mitzvah. But that's really not the mitzvah. The mitzvah of the welcoming guests is. That's a mitzvah of tzedakah. Welcoming guests is about fraternity, friendship, care, and showing care can be through gefilte fish and a piece of chicken. Enjoy me the meal, absolutely. But that functionally, it's you're feeding someone. Walking them to the door is framing everything that happened before it. It's saying this meal wasn't because I think because you needed a meal. It's because it's tzedakah I give. This wasn't tzedakah. This was because we're friends. And this was because, and therefore, past the meal. The meal's gone. I'll walk you to the door. Because the meal may be done, but the relationship, the experience is not done. Because this is about us. Now the meal part is done. But now we're walking to the door. That, as the Rebbe puts, the mitzvah of welcoming guests and the element of accompanying introduces a very, very important component into the whole kindness sphere. Because the kindness sphere is generally about helping someone. I go out, I change someone's tire. So what I did this morning, I did my thing, and then someone needed a tire, I fixed their tire. But what if after fixing the tire, we chatted a little bit? Just because I didn't just fix someone's tire, which would also be a mitzvah, doing something for a stranger. But here it's something, this is about friendship. Helping strangers is a big mitzvah. Fostering friendships is a different mitzvah. And it's part of what Abraham taught us. Did Abraham help people who he didn't know? Absolutely. And we're told that he had Arabs coming to his, whatever Arabs meant at the time, I guess, but the Arab in that lineage would come to through the desert, and they would come into his tent, and there were pagans, and he would hear he's a monotheist, and he would help them, he would give them food, and it says that they would worship the sand and the dust on their feet, and they brought it into the tent with them, and he was good. He and Sarah were good. They just wanted to envelop these strangers and help them. That's one mitzvah. The mitzvah that we're trying to bring out here is the mitzvah of strengthening bonds between us who are not strangers, and and not only taking care of each other and filling needs, but strengthening the bonds of fraternity. Giving a meal can be seen as filling a need. But spending the time afterwards means it's kind of about us. And the meal was an expression of that. So as a matter of fact, there's even though I think I put here, one second. Actually, so you know something, one of the reasons I send out the source notes in the morning is because I want to rethink how the order is, and then it always changes anyway. If you go to note 13, it says, give the Code of Jewish Law, it says that giving tzedakah in a way that the donor doesn't know which poor person received it, and the recipient doesn't know who gave it, is true tzedakah for the sake of him. We have as a value that we give tzedakah anonymously to people we don't know. You're not fostering any friendships there because you don't know who got it. no one has the ability to feel thankful to you. And you don't know, you weren't expressing any empathy or feeling for someone because you don't know who got it. That's a beautiful tzedakah. Because the mitzvah of tzedakah is to say, I want to help fill people's needs. And I'm giving to this charity because I know they help do it. I don't need to know who has a need. I have no desire to know who has a need. And I don't want that person to feel uncomfortable that I know they have a need or to feel indebted to me because I feel the need. That's a beautiful idea of tzedakah. But the anonymity does not serve the idea of creating these bonds. It's a separate thing. When we give, there's a question in Jewish law, in Purim, we give out food baskets. It's called Mishloach Manot, Shalach Manos. There's a question in Torah law, can you give it anonymously? What if I left for one of you on Purim, I left you a little a cake and some little thing of vodka, whatever it is, and some hamantashen at your doorstep. No card, nothing. In Basking Ridge, you'd probably figure who dropped it off. But would that be the right thing to do? Shalach Manos anonymously. And the rabbis wrote, no, don't do that. Because that the Purim Shalach Manos is about communal bonds, friendship bonds, fostering that sense that we care about each other. I'm defeating the purpose if I give it anonymously. I'm sending a gift because I say, I'm thinking of you. We're thinking of you. We care about you. Happy Purim. Not looking for credit. We're looking to be able to say, to express something, say, we care about you. And that is its own value. If someone has needs, we want to do it anonymously. So you show them you care about them differently. But there are two different types of kindness, two different types of generosity. Where we can, without diminishing the recipient's sense of self and ability, sense of pride in who they are, or without introducing any humiliation to them, we want to be open about it. We want to walk them to the door. We want to say, not to say this was about, not to spell out this was about us getting closer, but it's so obvious. I'm giving this because you're you, because you matter to me, because I like your company. We do, not are we usually. So if we go back therefore to number, I guess 9, 10, whatever it is, I messed this up. When Maimonides, because I put it back here again because I want to go into it again, he writes, the reward one receives for accompanying guests is greater than all the others, accompanying guests. And then he said about spilling blood. Spilling blood meant, especially in scriptural times, like I said, someone could get, God forbid, physically hurt, attacked, damaged outside. But the Rebbe offered that there's another thing of spilling blood, which is 11 from the Talmud. It says, one who embarrasses. And the language, it's interesting, the language for embarrassing someone, the Talmudic language, the expression is malbin pnei chavero. Chavero means a chaver, a friend, a fellow. Pnei means face. Malbin, lavan, it means you make someone's face white. What is that? Why would I make? What is making someone's face white to do this, embarrassing someone? And the Talmud says, one who embarrasses, literally makes their face turn white, it means like pale. Someone else in public is considered to have spilled their blood. Now that's kind of drastic. It's like I murdered someone because I made a joke. I insulted them in public. I was just kidding. For the blood drains from their face and they become pale. That's what the Talmud says. Conceptually, poetically, but importantly, morally, the Talmud is saying the impact you have on someone when you embarrass them publicly, and whether it's they're blushing or they're turning pale. So in a subtle way, the Talmud's comparing that to spilling their blood. You're making their blood rush one way or the other, because it's severe. That's what the Talmud's not trying to say. Tell us is that it's severe. So if as a student, I walked out of one of those Friday night meals, and I felt that, you know something, I think they actually only invited me because they thought I have nowhere to go. They thought I'd be hungry. I feel a little bit like a schlepper. Or if it was clear to me that they invited me because they want me at their table, and hopefully they see me as somehow contributing to that table, or at least that contributing to the friendship that we have. And one way of them showing that is walking me out and not having it end as soon as it's all done, finished eating, we did our work, we fed the guy, goodbye. If it's not about that, if it's about the relationship, that is something that will make me feel better. It made me feel good being in someone's house. You can imagine feeling not good, depending on how it was given. The grace, the graciousness, the kindness, the sense of friendship that surrounded the actual transfer of food or of whatever it may be. And that can go for many different things. I said giving tzedakah is a different type of thing. But what happens if you're raising money for someone else, or for the American Cancer Society? There's a way for a donor to give it in a way where if you feel like, okay, they felt trapped, cornered, they had to do it and they gave it. It doesn't feel good. Or where they appreciate the mitzvah, they appreciate the relationship, they appreciate their involvement. They may even say they feel good about their involvement. That's a donation that shines more. So it's a concept that may be introduced specifically through this idea of accompanying guests, but it works its way into everything. It works its way into helping someone with change their tire. They will know whether I saw this as an unwelcome intrusion on my day, or a welcome opportunity for me to help a friend. They're going to know, because it's hard to hide those things. And that's why if you look at text 12, this is from a great rabbi of the 12 and 1300s, Rabbi Abachia, says, know that accompanying the guest after the meal is the climax of the mitzvah and the peak of the reward. It makes all the difference. And again, it's not just about having guests, but any mitzvah where we're helping somebody. But this is the example. So now that, as far as that's concerned, we can see Maimonides is saying that, first of all, he's pointing out that the accompanying of the guests is the primary thing. He's also saying that look what these guests must have picked up, and look what the Torah is telling us. When he's having a communion with God, which has got to be top of the heap as far as experiences. But he knew that Abraham knew, and it was the guests must have known, because that when they came in, I guess you see he's in the middle of them doing something really. He's in this holy state. Now he runs to go give them toast. He knows, and he's showing that this is really important to me. And people are really important to me. And it's not just because they need. Who says they need? They didn't come asking for anything. They're there. Maybe they have all the provisions. But they matter because they're people. And that's why Maimonides points to as his source for the mitzvah, not Abraham saying, please don't go anywhere. I gotta go take care of these people, which does prove that Abraham had a sense of priorities. But the very fact that he left some of his field of vision open, his concentration open, he left the part open because that was so important, even more important than the communion of God, because he knew God felt it was more important than the communion with God. That says a lot about how much he valued relationships with people and how much he was trying to convey that to us as his children, that sense of generosity. Someone just asked a question. Let me just see if I can do it. If in the community, a majority of the people are learned in this mitzvah, I guess, there still could be a sense of artificiality felt by the receiver because it may be viewed as not fully genuine because of the sages that ever taught it. I think what you're asking, and tell me if that's correct, is that once something becomes a practice, any practice can become artificial. Whether it's putting on tefillin or saying, I'm sorry, or saying, I love you before you go to work. How many people do that as a habit? Everybody, is it always an expression of this sincere swelling of heart? You know, going to work, I love you. So sure, when I walk someone to the door or someone walked me to the door when I was their guest, I'm not sure. You can't know exactly what it was. But I guess that, you know, because we sense each other and because our body languages say something, I'll bet you that most people will know if it's just me taking steps with them to the door, it could be me making sure they leave. You know, it's the idea, it represents something. It represents something we should be aware of. Someone's coming to our house is one thing, but anytime we're giving to someone, yes, the most important thing is that they get it. That's the mitzvah tzedakah. But there's another mitzvah, the mitzvah of creating bonds of caring. And my thing, filling their need, doesn't necessarily meet that mitzvah. So from my end, if they need their $20, they don't care about, they may not care about anything else. But me as the giver, I've got two mitzvahs to take care of. I have to, yes, the most important thing for them is the $20, and that's the mitzvah tzedakah. But where's my loyalty to Abraham and Sarah? To give it in a way which makes them feel good, makes them feel connected, makes them feel welcome to come back another time. So the answer is, if that was the question, sure, it can be artificial. I bet you it's artificial many times. There's no real way of hard and fast legislating or ensuring our sentiments, because our sentiments are our sentiments. Depends on where we are at this moment. But the Torah is telegraphing where we want to put our sentiments. And here one could think, I had them over, I had people over, I gave them my food, it cost me money. That's it. I did my mitzvah. But which mitzvah? You fed them? Who says they needed your money? As a matter of fact, with welcoming guests, there are commentaries that say it's specifically not for people, not poor people. That's a different mitzvah. Big mitzvah. But what about your friends? What about your neighbors? What about we don't only care about those who are deficient in something. We're all deficient in something. What about the forging of meaningful bonds between each other? That's a different lane. It can connect with the others, but the main thing is it's different. It's fostering the relationships we have. And for that reason, you know, the Rebbe asked if there were angels, and Rashi says in 14, note 14, says the angels didn't really eat, because angels don't eat. They're spiritual beings. They don't. So they didn't really eat since they're angelic. They only appeared to eat. So the Rebbe asked a very simple question. If they didn't really eat, then Abraham didn't really do the mitzvah. He thinks he gave them gefilte fish, but however they made it disappear, they don't need gefilte fish. They didn't eat gefilte fish. They didn't digest gefilte fish. It appeared they digested gefilte fish. That part was a mirage. So he said. So the Rebbe said, "How odd that you have the mitzvah of welcoming guests is portrayed in a case where it really didn't happen. And not only that, Abraham interrupts God for a mitzvah that wasn't really a mitzvah. He was giving food where it wasn't necessary. And if you look, the Medrash says, it says, who showed kindness to those who didn't need it? Abraham and the angels. The angels are not deficient. The angels didn't need anything. The angels aren't friends. The angels they're not creating a relationship. So Abraham, it was a faux mitzvah that we're told, it's shown as that's the example of it. And number two, Abraham interrupted God for something that wasn't really a mitzvah. And God set him up for that. God set him up to do something he shouldn't have done. But that's exactly the point. It was a case where they didn't need it. But it was that Abraham's concern for them because he thought they were human. Even in a case where they weren't even human. The fact that Abraham and then Sarah are committed to these people and wanted to take care of them before they knew they needed anything. And Abraham was willing to put God on hold because of how important it is. The Torah specifically chooses a case where it wasn't the case of tzedakah. It wasn't a case where anyone really needed anything. They weren't even real people. This is trying to spotlight how the giver is supposed to feel, how the giver is supposed to act. Most of Torah talks about just take care of the deficiency. That's true. Someone needs something, take care of it. Your sentiment is in the right place, too bad. Daven later and figure it out. Do it. They say there's a commentaries ask, why isn't there a bracha on giving tzedakah? There's a bracha on all the mitzvahs. Someone, if comes to my door now and asks for something, and I'm going to give it to them, why don't I make a bracha? One of the answers is, why should he have to wait? Don't make them wait. They need. Don't push it off. 100%. I don't want to diminish that at all. If someone needs something, filling that need is a value. But that's one specific point of it, that's tzedakah point. What about the friendship point? What about the relationship point? That's not only about getting something done. It's about showing we care about each other. It's showing that someone matters to us, that we matter to each other. And that is encapsulated in the idea of accompanying the guest. It wasn't just about the meal. It's about the relationship. So leave that over there if there are any questions.
Rabbi,
Yes, ma'am.
about 23 years ago, I interviewed for a teaching position. And the people would come to get the interviewee. So somebody came to greet me, brought me into the conference room. And I had my interview. And at the end, this young woman got up and escorted me and talked to me, not about the interview, but about really who I was, did I have kids, that kind of thing. We had a lovely conversation. We stood at the end. She made sure that I knew where I was going. Did I, was I straight on directions? This is before Waze. And I thought how lovely that was. I mean, I left the interview feeling really positive, and I thought this is a place I could work. I ended up getting the position. And about 3 years after that, I was put on an interview committee. And I started to do what she had done. I would greet them and then escort them out. And I started doing that with parents after meetings. And
Because you're a teacher.
Yeah, I was a teacher. But there were some very difficult meetings that I would have with parents in denial, state officials, different, probation officers, things like that. But I always made it a point to do that. And I never thought, the only thing I thought about was how kind it was that first person. Here you are having an interview and you're nervous and concerned, and did I come across well? And she spent a couple of minutes with me afterwards. And it was just such a nice transition. And I found it so successful with parents because they really appreciated that one-on-one time to just, either review something or ask, could they call me, or, and I thought that that's just a lovely way to be. So I didn't realize how Jewish that was. I didn't know that.
Thanks for sharing that. That's a good exhibit of this value in action. Yeah, and it's really Jewish.
It was a great class. Thank you. That was a great class.
I don't know if there are any other questions. Scott has a question, I think. He just raised his hand.
Thank you very much.
Okay, be well. See you next week.
Have a good week, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.